Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Soul Spark. This week's guest is Jimi Vaughn, who is a diversity executive and inclusion strategist. Welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So excited to have you here and to dive into today's topic with you. So, the first question I ask all of my guests is the question: what sparks your soul?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I really like that. All
Thank
right,
you.
so I I think purpose sparks my soul, like making sure that that what I am doing has meaning. I get very much so, like driven. I think I'm one of those people that can basically get excited about just about anything as long as it really like has value. So I think purpose is something that I'm constantly, like striving for and making sure that whatever it is that I'm doing has impact, and it is either making like the world a better place, making a process simpler, making, just kind of bringing people together, connectivity, or anything like that. So you can kind of define it in a variety of ways, but I would think it's purpose.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love that so much. And the episode I just posted yesterday, I talked about purpose but more of like our purpose, like why we are here. But I think it's so important that we bring exactly what you said, that intention, that purpose into every single thing that we do and understand why we're doing what we're doing and what we're doing and how it can make the world a better place and all of that. So,
Yeah,
such
because
a
then it's
beautiful
like
answer.
why are we here otherwise,
Yeah,
right?
what's the
But
point?
like, what's the point? I'm like, it's a real privilege to actually be able to, to impact and influence, and to be able, to provide meaning for something, or to make our
Yeah.
actions have meaning. So yeah, that's
Mhm.
exciting to me.
Yeah, and with that, it just made me think like what a privilege it is to have the like space and the safety and the security to be able to think about living with purpose, because not
Agreed.
everybody in the world can do that. So,
Agreed.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk about what you do. Um so we were talking before about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the abbreviation is DEI. Can you
Mhm.
explain what that is for people and how you bring that into the work that you do in the world?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, I think people have sometimes general concepts of what like diversity, equity, and inclusion is. I
Mhm.
think most often people just think, like race, ethnicity, religion, sex, gender, and all of those. But it's about, it is definitely about those things, and especially kind of like in our current climate, particularly here in the U.S., those
Mhm.
do are elements that come to the forefront. But I mean, it's so much more though. It's about diversity of thought, of experience, of background, of age, of generation, of, ability, and so on and so forth. So it's just like, there's so many different things. And that's really what, like diversity is about. It's about varied experiences, right? Diversity is something that really is just kind of like a state or a status of like, there's a variety of different, things, people, beliefs, concepts, ideologies,
Yeah.
ways of doing things. That's what diversity, in and of itself really is. Then you talk about like equity, and a lot of times I think the question comes up about why you use the term equity versus equality, right? So equity tends to be about fairness, right? Or fair treatment, whereas equality is about equal treatment, right? And so I use a lot of times
Mm.
the illustration of, you got a fish and a squirrel. Is the test of how fast you can climb up a tree, a fair assessment for both of those to talk about competency? And it really isn't, right? Like the fish has
Mhm.
different strengths. Squirrel wouldn't be able to do the things that the fish can do, but the fish can't do the same things that the squirrel can do. But there's probably certain things that they both can do. So it is about, like kind of like applying the same measures and the same, the fair treatment based off of the individual's, kind of own experience and what their capabilities are. So that's why we use the term equity versus, equality in these kinds of discussions.
Mhm.
And then, we talk about inclusion, and that's about like how well people are, kind of like involved in in the decision making. See, because I think we froze.
Oh yeah.
Oh, here
It's
we
like
go.
you're back. You're
I'm
back.
back.
Okay.
Okay. I was like, oh, we froze. What was the
I know.
last thing? And I'll go back and I'll start from there.
You were saying with inclusion, maybe start over from inclusion
Okay.
because I got all distracted. Yeah.
Great.
And then I can edit
Okay.
it.
So, so we got diversity, we got equity, and then we have inclusion. And inclusion is really, just about how well people are kind of integrated, involved, part of the discussion, part of the conversation, having agency over like themselves and all of that. Because you can have diversity, but if everybody that has a different kind of experience or opinion is on the outskirts, it's still not an effective, kind of situation. You want people to be like included, and often that results in another term that a lot of people hear is belonging. People, when they feel that they, if you are included and you are treated fairly, you feel that you belong. So that's
Mm.
really what what diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI is really all about. And as a profession, I get to do this every day. Like I get to do it as part of my actual, job, where, I work with businesses. I work, specifically, like I have a day job with my organization. My title there is like a VP. My title is the VP of Diversity and Engagement. So I really focus on, making sure that our processes, our systems, our education, and all of that takes into consideration as many varied experiences as possible, right?
I love that. Yeah. And I just love all the different meanings you give to each of those words. And we that concept of diversity, it's like you said, in every aspect there is diversity. And if we can all embrace ourselves for our uniqueness and our strengths and even our struggles, and then if everyone else can embrace each other for that, it just creates this world of acceptance where everyone can truly thrive. So I think it's just such beautiful work that you're doing. Would you mind sharing your journey with how you got into this work? What drew
Yeah.
you to it?
Oh, see, so I grew up in Ferguson, Missouri. So most people are familiar with, Ferguson because, it became kind
Mhm.
of the epicenter of how we talk about race and justice,
Mhm.
with the events, unfortunate events of Michael Brown, and the demonstrations that happened as a result of that. So, while I won't like mischaracterize, Ferguson and just act like there was constant, racial animosity or anything like that, it wasn't that, but it was, but race was something that I was always aware of, right? It was just
Mhm.
very much so. Um, Something that you'd be present, like that was always kind of like forefront
Yeah.
and would be present, and even in the undertone of conversation, just because you know otherness is a thing, especially if you are part of a group that doesn't necessarily feel like the world is built or shaped for you,
Mhm.
or with you in mind. It's just something that you're constantly reminded of. So I would say that, a little bit of that is something that has always been really present. And I think just kind of growing up, I was a small kid. I, had like super big glasses, a big head, big feet, and I was like, like super skinny. And so
That was
like
adorable though.
I, when I look back, I'm like, oh, but I also somewhat cringe. Uh, but the reality, like was it's like, kids could be mean, but I also recognized that like somehow it never really stopped me. And I was always like the person that I didn't care if you wanted to come from me. I still stuck up for the underdog, not realizing
Love
that I
it.
also was the underdog. I'd be like, wait a minute, no.
Oh wait, you can kick my butt.
Yeah, but like I was one of those that like I know the rules. I will go to the principal, to the teacher. I will have you
Oh.
wrapped up in so much, like parental involvement. Like I was that kid. Super
You can't
annoying.
even touch me. You're going to be
Like
wrapped
you
up in so
can't
much of
even write litigation like as like a 10-year-old. Like that's where my head was. But it
natural
was
gifts.
it's like you kind of lean into whatever you kind of like naturally have.
Mhm.
And so, like with that, it was always kind of like elements of every job or thing that I actually uh, kind of did, no matter where it was like that I always wanted to make sure that people were included and people, had were set up for success no matter what. And so then I ended up meeting somebody who ended up becoming like a mentor, maybe like 10 years ago. And she was doing a panel, and her name is Tiffany Smith Anoa'i. She's the executive vice president of diversity and communications at CBS. And so we ended up talking, and I was like, wait a minute, this is a job. Like,
I
like,
love including people.
right? I was like, I do that. I love that. We should do that. How do you do that? And then so, basically we ended up talking, and that like it somehow paths started, like working, and she continuously kind of, fed into me as far as like information, things that you would need to know, things like certificates that you might want to get, like stuff like that, things to be prepared for. And ultimately things just kind of fell into place. And I ended up being in the position that I'm in.
Oh, so amazing. I always talk about, I'm obviously clearly from what I'm about to say, I'm big on purpose. Like I love it. And I always talk about how fun it is when you're like you've fully stepped into and you're like living your purpose, which I think is also ever unfolding and growing and has many different aspects to it, right? But your story is the perfect example because we're talking about you as a child. Like you can look back and see all the different things that led you to where you are right now. And
Mhm.
I think that's so beautiful.
I love it, and it does make it feel like, oh, you were supposed to be doing this. Like this is what you're
Absolutely.
absolutely supposed to be doing. And so like that makes me happy. That makes me very, very excited. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate for that to be the case.
Absolutely. Yeah. When we find ourselves in such a position, it is very fortunate to, have understand why you're here and what you're doing. And yeah, it's beautiful. Okay. So how can people, because I know you mostly do DEI with companies, but how can people use this concept of DEI in their daily living?
Yeah, I think it's funny because it's like you get into it to do, like it's part of my everyday life. So it's not just a thing that I do for organizations, but I see where that organizations have such an impact on, being able to create opportunity and remove barriers for, their employee populations. So, but I think the core of it really is things that you do, day to day. It really is about like human to human interaction. And I think at the root of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really just about consideration, right?
Mhm.
It's more than just respect. It's actually about, consideration. It is about thinking about what others, kind of are experiencing, or how this decision in my, my day-to-day life has an impact on someone else. These things that maybe I take, as a given, these are part of my norms, might not be the same things for, like for others that are surrounding me, right? Are there things that I can kind of see as potentially being an issue? And do I need to speak up or say something, like about that kind of in advocacy or allyship, or just kind of normalizing that discussion of, who does this impact? Right. And
Mhm.
it's like just in every decision, like even if it's like a small like decision, it could even be, if you're a parent with your kids, it's like thinking, like training yourself to think about how my decision will impact my children, and based off of the individuals who they are. That's the same thing that I do like every day with, like in a professional state. It is, thinking about, okay, so if we make this decision, who do we impact? How do we impact? Does it impact everybody the same way? Does anybody have, and like, is this going to resonate with some more than others? Are people going to have more access or opportunity based on things, that are just inherent to their identity and who they are? And if I can broaden that and make it so that everyone, or has the most people possible, have, the ability to either have access to that resource or opportunity, then, like, then great. Is this going to have a negative impact on somebody? Well, okay, so one on this group, but it might on this group. Maybe I can adjust it and broaden that so that it lessens the ability, like to do that. And I think the
Mhm.
more that we hone kind of like that skill and normalize that as part of, kind of like our decision making process. And like I think we set ourselves up for success in building a more inclusive, space. Because really that's really all, that's at the root of it. It's how can I consider, more than just my own perception or more than just my experience? How can I leave room for what I don't know? And that takes,
Mhm.
that takes a little bit of learning, that takes a little bit of bravery, that takes a little exploration. Yeah, but I think ultimately, from a day-to-day standpoint, and like in the simplest way, that those simple acts really can kind
Yeah.
of like shift us toward a much more inclusive space. And I would say that the more inclusive you are, the more likely you will have end up with a place that is diverse. And then
Mhm.
when you're thinking about those things, and also if you're going through that process of thinking of who's missing, how would it impact, you're setting yourself up to to really treat people equitably.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that I was thinking that as you were saying it, how it for some many people it's probably a practice, and it's like you said, just going through it and letting your mind open up and expand, and allowing yourself to see things from a different perspective than maybe you were raised
Hmm.
to see things from, and all of that. And I, like you mentioned earlier, that's something that's been big on the forefront of our mind as a country in the last year. People waking up to, I mean, I'm a white woman, and the whole Black Lives Matter movement blew up, and it woke me up to certain things that I wasn't aware of, and never even thought that I could be part of that issue because it just wasn't ever brought to my attention. That doesn't make it right that I didn't know,
Hmm.
but it's beautiful that that was able to like wake up many people's consciousnesses. And it's like this continual practice, and it's always going to be, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I think that there's also something of note in this, is that that I like to make sure that people understand, is because we tend to associate discriminatory act or practice with intention, or with malintent. And
Mhm.
while, yes, there are many situations where that is the case, and those are the more extreme, demonstrations of those, is like some kind of like
Mhm.
ill intent. The vast majority lives in the subconscious. The vast majority of these impacts, which is why I try to, talk about it in a way where it's just about consideration and taking that additional step to think about more. Because it's like really where a lot of the negative impacts on marginalized communities, or underrepresented communities, is because of an assumption that everyone's norm is the same
Mhm.
and operating as such,
Mhm.
right? And so that just can be from daily interactions to public policy to corporate policy and procedure. But like the vast majority is like, oh, this is just my norm. And doesn't everybody operate that way?
Yeah.
And I think that's usually where it lives, where so much of it lives. And then it starts to get more into that, like, the intention component of it, when people start to say, oh, well, that change is going to take away my norm, or it's going to make my norm different. So I now want to protect that. Right. And
Mhm.
then it becomes varying levels of intensity of that. And that's like the spectrum that we end up seeing. But as humans, like, we all have biases, we all have assumptions, we all, like, have those things. And those are natural. But I like to, also say that one of the things that like makes humans so unique from like other animals in the animal kingdom is our ability to reason. And so when we recognize that, like, oh, that base, kind of primal activity isn't good, acceptable, when we've got like people that are from different groups, different backgrounds, different, like histories, different perspectives, different values, then I need to be able to kind of push pause on that assumption and that activity, and kind of think a little bit
Totally.
outside of that. Yeah,
Mhm.
and broaden my frame of reference and consider varied experiences in this day to day.
Totally. Yeah. And, a big part of the work that I teach is meditation and journaling and introspection and bringing our subconscious programming and limiting beliefs about ourselves, limiting beliefs about the world to the conscious mind from the subconscious. And so I love that you just said that, because, right, that's the only way we can start to fix how we are showing up in the world, is by, like, taking that time, noticing these different aspects, diversity, equity, like equity, that piece that you were just talking about really reminded me of that word. It's like just remembering the varying places that people come from.
Yep.
And then allowing yourself to sit with, like, where you're at and see, like, how can I expand my mind and my acceptance of others and my inclusion of others, and help them to also thrive in this world. Right?
Yeah, no, I'm on board. I say yes. Right.
Yeah, I think this is just such a beautiful message that you are teaching to the world. And how can we all begin to advocate a bit more? So, like, we're waking up, we wake up, we start to look at it, we start to, like, change how we're showing up, because we realize, like, okay, there is that resistance there. You talked about the change piece, like, right? When change comes in, our ego is like, no, 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 no. We don't want this, because you're safe in your bubble of where you are. So it's like we have to see that and be like, thanks, but I'm going to move forward and work towards change. And once we can do that, that's when we can really, like, start to believe in and begin to advocate for others. So can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we talk about becoming great advocates, I think it's kind of multi-pronged. One of those things, though, is being able to issue spot, right? That's required for, for real, true, like, advocacy. And the way that we hone our issue spotting skills is that education, right? It is listening to more stories, being able to, see from varied experiences. This is why, a lot of times, because I like the company I work for is also in the entertainment industry. So, like, we talk about it in entertainment a lot, about, like, representation mattering. We talk about, like, the different awards ceremonies and all of that, and who's nominated and who's not nominated, and like that it's about increasing our frame of reference,
Hmm.
right? Because humans are built for storytelling, and to use storytelling as a means of understanding how we exist in the world. So stories and hearing perspectives is really all about creating frame of reference. And when we create, have an increased frame of reference, we increase our capacity for empathy. We can put ourselves in that situation, we can put ourselves in other people's shoes, because we've got more frame of reference. But when a narrative is singular, when that's all we have, like, our brains want to categorize. We want to think that everybody's having that experience. But when
Hmm.
we've got multiple stories, our brains are kind of forced to pause to see, whatever I'm experiencing now, which one of these things does it most closely tether? So
Yeah.
it allows us to, to not lump people or experiences or make assumptions. It actually forces us into critical thinking, which is absolutely necessary for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and for creating an inclusive space, right? Because we
Hmm.
basically only know from our own experiences. So if you're going to be able to connect to somebody else's experiences, you're going to have some kind of exposure to it, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of times it takes intention to do that, because if you kind of live in a homogenous space, whether that's ethnically, religiously, like language, whatever, um, you got to make an effort to know a little bit more. It doesn't mean
Hmm.
that what you're doing in your day-to-day doesn't impact others. But to get back to the the honing your issue spotting kind of skill set, it's the more that you do that, the more primed you are to see something when it's not right, the more prime you are to be able to, to grasp, that seems like it's not the right like thing to do right now, or that person, something about that doesn't resonate, like with me. Because we
Hmm.
talk about, like, our, our gut instinct, and usually our gut is more in tune to, like, our norm. And when we have something, like, when something in our gut doesn't quite work, it's because something is outside of that. Something has challenged that. And you're like, huh, I can't put my finger on it exactly, but something's not sitting right,
Hmm.
in that space. And that's one of those things that's really, really required. So it's not just about education. It is the impact of that education is increasing our frame of reference. And that allows us to be able to issue spot. So that's like the first step of really becoming a strong advocate, is learning how, to issue spot. Then it is, practicing at speaking up, right?
Hmm.
And it, because for some people it comes naturally and they just know how to dive in there and be like, ah, no, I'm taking no prisoners. Like some people it just comes natural. I
Yeah.
think I was one of those people.
Hmm.
Like as a kid it was like, what are you talking about? I don't care. um like it's just,
Love it.
part of me. But I know that, from a lot of people, they'd rather avoid, conflict, or things like that. So it can just be small, actions. And the more that you get accustomed and comfortable and recognize like how you go about, bringing something up, how you go about talking about difficult conversations, how you go about holding family members, like accountable and things like that. You get comfortable with the language used, you get comfortable with being able to navigate how people respond, and you get like so much more confident. But it takes that practice, and the more you do it, the easier it is, and the more you actually impact change in every room that you're in, because people are like, they're going to start to think, oh, you know what, let me not say this because that person's going to say, oh, you should have thought about that, or don't use those words like around me. And at first that can feel uncomfortable, and at first it can feel like, because people want to shape that
Defensive.
as exactly, they want to shape
Yeah.
that as a negative. But that's actually
Hmm.
a really good thing for people to
Hmm.
be like, oh, your presence like sparks something in me to be better.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if they're defensive at the beginning, later on, they're going to be like, well, like in their head, like
Yeah.
maybe I was wrong,
Right,
it
because it's
like
like,
sparks that thing, the wheels turning.
if they get it from enough people, as sooner
Yeah.
or later, you're going to be like, okay, let me just
Who,
practice. Let me just
yeah.
try to do something a little bit
Who's the
differently.
common denominator here?
Right? Exactly, exactly. Or like that's the hope. And then I say like the last thing about being an advocate is really just, being brave and recognizing that you're gonna make mistakes, right?
Hmm.
Because it's like this is a really nuanced discussion, a nuanced conversation, and it can be
Hmm.
difficult. And sometimes you don't want to say things because you don't want to say the wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is like, you know what? We're gonna make mistakes. It's just gonna happen.
Hmm.
And so what I tell people when I'm like, if you ever get like somebody corrects you about something, the best way to deal with that is like take the correction, make the correction, and move forward.
Love
Like it,
that.
it, it really is like, it's just that. It's like, huh, okay, I didn't recognize that was a problem. All right, let me change that, not say that. And then I won't dwell on it and be like, all right, so moving forward, I'll try to like make sure that it's part of like my day to day.
Yeah. Like, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I was wrong. Thank you. And moving
100%.
forward. Yeah. Um, and that's the only way we can learn and we can begin to use our voice more. And I love how you just kind of broke it down into steps because I think, yeah, the concept of advocacy, especially in really sensitive matters, can be very overwhelming. And then people get like, analysis paralysis and
Mm.
just don't do anything because they're scared of saying something wrong or feel like they have to go full throttle. Um, and then in reality, change really comes from like the small things that we
Yep.
implement into our life. Like they
It's when it
build and they
becomes
build and
habit.
they build.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's change
Yeah.
happens when we shift our habits.
And then when we shift our habits, the people around us, like you said, we might like correct them on something small, but when we do that, when we show up differently, the people around us start to shift,
Mhm.
and then the people around them, and then so on and so forth. So that was a beautiful way that you broke that down. I love that. So how's the entertainment industry? You said that. I was like, that must be quite an industry to be doing what you're doing in.
Honestly, I love it because there's so many people that are just creative at heart, and people that are
Yeah.
creative at heart, like they feel things, and
Hmm.
so when they get passionate about it, they really get passionate about it, which I love,
Yeah.
and like, yeah, but and I also know the impact that media has and that, entertainment has. Like I was saying earlier, it's like we're built for storytelling. We're built to, to see the world through stories. So
Hmm.
like, how great is that? And so I migrated to kind of like entertainment because of realizing that, kind of that impact. It's like the things that are created, like within my industry kind of shape the way that people look at the world and how they
Yeah.
look at each other. And so if I can impact that in a more, some way or some kind of conscientious way, and the people that are creating these types of things, uh, like I know that
That's
that's a ripple
huge.
effect. I'm like, I know that's a ripple effect on a
Yeah.
on a grand scale that like I may never see the full extent of that, but I'm like, that ties that back to that purpose. I'm like, yes, there it
Yeah.
goes. There it goes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that
That's
that's why I get
beautiful.
excited about it.
Yeah. So have you been in the entertainment industry, since you started out in this
Uh,
career?
Well, since
Yeah.
doing specifically this, yes, like
Okay.
that's been the primary. But I worked in hotels, and at one point I worked at a pet hotel, so which was
That's
which was
amazing.
it was fun. It was really like fun. But like I would think in any kind of like management role, I've been in film and television probably for the last 14 years. So since like I
Nice.
moved to Los Angeles, I think I've
Yeah.
only worked in entertainment, but prior to
Yeah.
that, other things. But DEI has always been an element. It just
Yeah.
it just always has.
Yep, there's those stepping stones
Yep.
to where you're at now, and can't wait to see where you end up in the future.
Thank you. Me either. No.
Yeah, it's exciting. But I love that you worked at a pet hotel because everybody who listens to the show knows I'm obsessed with my dog. So
Ah,
I talked about her all the time. Do you have any pets?
which is sad. Like I don't. I almost got like a COVID pet, but usually, like was trying to think about like fostering and things like that. But my job really hasn't slowed down, and I think that was the reason why I didn't. I grew up always having dogs, and I don't have like anything now, and I keep thinking about it regularly. But I'm like, I need to be able to make sure that I've got the attention and the bandwidth, to do it. Like being in
Hmm.
COVID times and the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor
Hmm.
demonstrations, like the work that I do has really intensified, like
Yeah,
just during that period. And yeah, that's the reason why I'm like, I don't want to have a puppy and then neglect it. Like I don't want to do
totally.
that. I gotta have
Yeah,
time, like to do
yeah.
it.
Got to make sure it's like happy and because
Yeah,
they love their person more than anybody else. So even if you take them to a
100%.
great sitter, they still miss you.
They miss their person, and that's
Yeah,
like I want to be
exactly.
that person.
I want to be the best
I
person.
want to be the best person for my
Totally.
pet.
Yeah. Well, that's so fascinating about doing the George Floyd and the Breonna Taylor marches and all of that. Can you talk about that more? And maybe just if you could leave us with, how we can continue the BLM movement moving forward, like really advocate to keep it going, as well as other like important things that should be brought to the front of our minds. Does that make sense? That
Yeah,
question? Yeah.
I think we got to make it a habit. Like we just have to make
Yeah.
advocacy a habit.
Mhm.
And with Black Lives Matter, every little thing. I know it can get, if you're not necessarily connected to it, but I think the more that you understand, the more that you educate like yourself, you like read books, by Black authors, from the Black perspective, follow, Black influencers on social media, to hear the things that like that people are saying, even if you don't understand like why they're saying it the way that they're saying it or how they're saying it. It's like that's part of of learning. That's part of understanding, right? When people are talking about their experiences and saying like these are the things that could help us, believe them. you know
Mhm.
believe
Mhm.
them when they say that these are the things that that could be helpful, or this is what we need from others, like this type of support. Like really go on that journey, with people that as much as you possibly can. I know that like we've got such a layered and sad history in the US,
Mhm.
frankly, with the relationship with like like Black Americans, and like we're still doing the work to undo that history.
Yeah.
Like our society literally was, was built on the backs of slaves, right? And so to assume that there's no real lasting impacts seems
Hmm.
illogical to me, right? It is
Absolutely.
like for
Yeah.
400 years, like, like that's how we were built. And
And then to think in
like,
such a short
and
span of time, it's like all good.
right, without having done the work to
Hmm.
actually undo it. It's like, we've got this tendency of doing like as a country, it's like, all right, well, I'll give you the minimum of what you're asking for to move us to the next phase. But it's like we rarely go above and beyond, or to go, to try to look at all of the impacts and think about it holistically. And that's the work that we're trying to accomplish now, which I feel is what,
Yeah.
like Black Lives Matter is really trying to do.
Hmm.
Like it's about looking at the experience holistically, looking at the cause and effect, looking at, what this here like has an impact on down the line there. And the more that people like recognize this is why history is so important. And knowing, your history, and knowing the history of others, and knowing, the reality and the honest, true history of, our origins and how we get here, is because it puts those things into context, right? It puts those things into context, and it allows us to really understand them, to grasp them, to digest them, to take them in, in a really profound way that can impact how we show up for each other, how we show up in our day to day, the things that we pass on to our children, the things that, the environment that we, that we shift with in our work worlds and in our social groups, and so on and so forth. Because that being that constant, being that intentional, being that purposeful is really, kind of like what we need. I would say the other thing is that we've got to get to a place where we are like kind of like relentlessly honest and relentlessly accurate, right? We like to superimpose our feelings on a situation, or what we believe, or our perception. I do not believe that there are multiple truths. I do believe that there are multiple experiences, varied experiences,
Mm.
but there's really only, truth is truth, right? It either happened or it didn't. Not what we felt about it, or not how we perceived it. All of those types of things are important for our individual experiences and how we've interacted with that thing. But the reality is truth, there's only, like one like factual kind of reality of like whatever the situation is. And the more
Yeah.
that we can be kind of committed to that thing, committed to being factual, committed to being truthful, and committed to finding that thing, it centers us in a way that like it gives us kind of like a homing device. Like it brings us back to center. No matter what we're feeling, or how we thought, or what we experienced about it, we can let that, become kind of like our guiding force in looking at, okay, so I see this as cause and effect. I see this was the history. I see this was that experience. That is the true, like element. I will deal with how I've perceived that before and interacted it, but I'm going to make sure that I differentiate those two things. And that really sets us up for, for success, and being able to actually treat what we're dealing with. Because a misdiagnosis is dangerous, right? Not
Mm.
being able to call a thing, or call a spade, or what it is, or getting the appropriate diagnosis for an illness, it'll have us treating COVID like a cold, right? And it's like,
Hmm.
that's dangerous, right? And I think that we've kind of done a little bit of that with, especially within like the US, where um, we get caught up in the how, the why, and the all the other stuff, as opposed to staying focused on diagnosing the real, like the real thing, so that we can truthfully treat that thing.
Oh, that was so like such a powerful statement. And yeah, it's like that's literally all we have to do, right? Is like stop and look at something, understand the actual true history of it, put our feelings and our emotions aside and our programming, and then make a decision from that place about how we're going to move forward. Um,
100%.
so beautiful. Yeah. And it's like that way of thinking, if anybody takes that in, no matter what their background is or like how they feel or think about anything, if they start living from that place, they start living from a place of truth, and yeah, the whole world can shift.
I
So,
agree. I got to
mic
be
drop to you.
optimistic, right?
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
love it. I love it. Well, do you have, obviously there's a lot of content now that's been coming out that can help us to expand our vision and our um, knowing of what is true. But do you have any specific books or resources that you would specifically recommend or that you have put out there that people can tune into? Because I love to have my guests share this. I think it's really important and it can help guide people further down the topic.
Yeah, I think there's a couple, kind of like go-tos, but I would say How to Be an Anti-Racist, I think is one that everybody's kind of been starting to read and to understand, but I think it's really a good book for people to kind of understand what the conversation is all about. It's like, especially if we're talking specifically about the Black experience within, the United States. I think it puts it into great context for people, and it makes it kind of easy to understand why just not being racist isn't really enough. It's
Mhm.
about, being intentional and taking action, to be anti-racist, right?
Mhm.
Is to actively want to dismantle the systems that are oppressing others. And I think that purpose, that intention is an incredibly, powerful, necessary, and poignant reality. So that's definitely a book I would recommend. But I also think that there's so much as far as, there's some great documentaries on, like Netflix, and like Ava DuVernay as 13th, which talked about the 13th Amendment. It's a really good one as far as like education's concerned, and understanding kind of like our prison system and how that was kind of formed, and just so many.
Wild.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. But I mean, literally, there's just so much. There's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that's out there that can fit, so many different types of sensibilities. So based off of you know how you consume,
Mhm.
like media. Like, I think Malcolm Gladwell's podcasts are amazing, like Revisionist History, and any of the books that he's done, like Blink is a very good one, which talks about kind of like implicit bias. So yeah, that was more than I think that you asked for, but there's so many things
Oh
I get
no, I'm
excited
like
about it.
keep keep
Yeah.
keep going. I love this. Yeah.
But,
I saw 13th and that I was like, this is insane. So, but again, it's just, opening our eyes
yep.
to things that for some reason we weren't aware of, not everyone was aware of or weren't taught, which, hopefully that starts to change in our school systems what truth is taught because that's
Yeah.
always a little fishy
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, we got to get comfortable with discomfort, right? Because I think we
Yes.
have such a space of not like of wanting to avoid discomfort at all times that we end up softening or, not really engaging in things that we should. But I often liken it with like, if the US were in therapy right now, we'd just be addressing our trauma, right?
Yeah.
And it can get ugly, and it can,
Yeah.
because it can get raw, and people, are talking about things and discovering things that they haven't, but there's no shortcuts.
Yeah.
We got
Yeah.
to stick with it. We got to go through the process. We have to do the work, and that's what we're engaged in right now. So it can feel uncomfortable, but when you know that there's a method to the madness, there's a reason, like why it's uncomfortable, it becomes so much easier to grasp and to really engage in, because like, we're just working out and I'm sore right now, but on the other side of it, I'm going to be real, like, a lot healthier, a lot more, agile, and able
Mhm.
to withstand so much.
Yeah. And discomfort is it's a beautiful sign, like you said, that you're on like the precipice of changing for the better or like strengthening whatever it is that you're feeling that discomfort around. There's a book called, I don't know if you've read it, War of Art. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to write it down so that I actually do
It's
read it.
it's such a good book. I have all my clients read it. It's about fear and resistance and like when resistance shows up. So in this situation, right, when we have resistance to the discomfort that we are feeling around having to change our like view of what we've known the world to be, when we have that resistance come up, it's actually a beautiful sign that this is something we need to dive deeper into.
It really is. It
So
really is.
it's not like, oh, I'm getting resistance. This means I need to stop. It means actually I need to push and go deeper. So
Love that.
yeah, it's a great book. I definitely recommend it. Stephen Pressfield.
Cool. All right. I'm getting it.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jimmy. This was incredible. Like I said before, love your energy. You have like the best smile, all of it.
Thanks.
We appreciate you and you coming on today to share with us and educate us. And all the work you're doing in the world is absolutely beautiful. Can you share with everyone where they can find you, where they can get into contact with you, all of that good stuff?
I'd say like the easiest is to follow me on Instagram, which is
Woo!
at Jimi_Vaughn. So it's Jimmy, Jimi, like Hendrix, _VAUGHN.
Awesome. That's a cool
Yes.
name. And I
Thank
like how
you.
you spell it, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll put that in the show notes for everybody. And yeah, thank you again. This was awesome. So much
I really
fun.
appreciate it. Thank you so much. I loved the conversation and so happy that you had me.
Yay. Me too.